The air in St. Mary's Asylum clung to my skin like a damp, oppressive blanket as I navigated its dimly lit corridors. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls, making the place feel like a gruesome stage for a sinister performance. Dr. Richards, my guide into this labyrinth of despair, had a gaze colder than the sterile surroundings. The patients, mere specters of their former selves, shuffled aimlessly through the narrow halls. Their eyes, empty and hollow, seemed to reflect the hopelessness that clung to the asylum's walls. It was a symphony of muted moans and distant cries, a chilling soundtrack to the nightmare I had unwittingly stepped into. Dr. Richards, a tall and skeletal figure, led me with a clinical detachment that bordered on cruelty. We approached the room with Mrs. Thompson, a fragile woman with sunken cheeks and vacant eyes. Dr. Richards regarded her with a cold indifference, as if she were less than human. Without uttering a word, he instructed me to restrain her frail form while he administered a concoction of medications. Mrs. Thompson's feeble pleas for mercy filled the air, leaving an unsettling taste in my mouth. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself that this was the harsh reality of mental health care. Dr. Richards continued his rounds, each patient a canvas for his clinical cruelty. The isolation ward held Mr. Davis, a man whose eyes darted frantically around the room in constant paranoia. Dr. Richards, with disturbing satisfaction, prescribed a series of electroconvulsive therapy sessions. The anguished screams that reverberated through the padded walls left a haunting imprint on my psyche. As the days turned into a relentless blur, Dr. Richards's sadistic practices unfolded like a sinister play. Experimental treatments were doled out as if the patients were nothing more than guinea pigs. Families, once hopeful, now wore expressions of despair and resignation. A disturbing pattern emerged as I delved into patient files. Dr. Richards preyed on the vulnerable, those without advocates or family ties. The more isolated the patient, the more he reveled in their suffering. Unable to ignore the atrocities any longer, I confronted Dr. Richards in his office. His response, a cold and mocking laugh, sent shivers down my spine. "You're just a pawn in a game you don't understand," he sneered, dismissing my concerns as if they were inconsequential. Late one night, while scouring patient records for evidence, I uncovered a hidden camera in the isolation ward. The footage revealed the horrors inflicted upon Mr. Davis during electroconvulsive therapy sessions. Armed with damning evidence, I prepared myself to expose Dr. Richards and free the tormented souls within St. Mary's. But as I grabbed the tape, the ominous shadow of Dr. Richards loomed in the doorway. His sinister smile revealed a twisted pleasure at my discovery. "You've been snooping around, haven't you?" he hissed, the weight of his malevolence pressing down on me. I pushed past him and fled the room, clutching the incriminating evidence, engaging in a harrowing chase through the asylum's desolate halls. Dr. Richards pursued me relentlessly, his footsteps echoing like the drumbeat of impending doom. I sought refuge in the hallway of the isolation ward, the camera footage clenched tightly in my fist. Dr. Richards caught up to me and grinned, his eyes gleaming with a madness that transcended reason. "You think you can expose me?" he taunted. "No one will believe you. You're just as trapped as these patients." And then, as the flickering lights dimmed, I found myself cornered. The distant echoes of our chase had drawn the attention of the vigilant orderlies. Suddenly they materialized, a silent and imposing force surrounding both Dr. Richards and me. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog as we stood there, caught in the crosshairs. The darkness and uncertainty closed in, creating a palpable sense of anticipation. And then, silence. The hum of fluorescent lights and the sterile scent of antiseptic permeated the air as I navigated the familiar halls of St. Mary's Asylum. The stark white walls echoed with the muted moans of patients, their eyes vacant, lost in the shadows of their own minds. My days blurred into a monotonous routine of clinical indifference. Mrs. Thompson, with her sunken cheeks, became a mere vessel for my experiments. The medications I administered were my brushstrokes, painting a canvas of despair. Her pleas for mercy were nothing more than discordant notes in the symphony of suffering. The isolation ward, a chamber of paranoia, housed Mr. Davis. His eyes darted frantically, mirroring the chaos within. Electroconvulsive therapy sessions became my twisted art, each scream a brushstroke on the canvas of his fractured psyche. My detached demeanor shielded me from the whispers of conscience. I reveled in my clinical prowess, convinced of my righteous pursuit. The patients were subjects, not human beings. Their suffering was a means to an end, a dark, elusive goal that justified my actions. The routine of cruelty continued, each patient a pawn in my experiment. The isolation I imposed on the vulnerable only fueled my sense of superiority. Families' hopes shattered, replaced by the resignation etched on their faces. The descent into madness was imperceptible, masked by the guise of clinical expertise. The lines between sanity and insanity blurred as I delved deeper into the abyss. The darkness I inflicted on others became a shadow that clung to my own soul. Confronted by an idealistic newcomer, I dismissed his concerns with a cold laugh. He was a pawn, too naive to grasp the complexity of the game. My authority silenced dissent, and I reveled in the power I wielded. Late one night, paranoia seeped into my consciousness. The walls of the asylum whispered accusations, and shadows danced in the corners of my vision. The camera in the isolation ward became my relentless judge, capturing the sins I dared not acknowledge. The newcomer's discovery ignited a fear I hadn't known before. His attempts to expose me became a threat to the fragile web of sanity I clung to. In my pursuit of control, I chased him through the desolate halls, his footsteps echoing the pounding of my own heart. The isolation ward, once a realm of my dominance, became a labyrinth of my unraveling mind. The flickering lights intensified the disarray within, casting eerie shadows that taunted me. The newcomer, armed with damning evidence, sought refuge within the padded walls. His desperate attempt to expose me sent shockwaves through the fragile foundation of my sanity. Laughter, haunting and maniacal, echoed through the abyss. As the lights flickered and dimmed, I descended into the chaos of my own creation. Unseen hands clawed at me, pulling me into the void where reality and delusion intertwined. The patient screams merged with my laughter, a cacophony of madness that consumed me. And then silence. I awoke in a cold sweat, gasping for air. The familiar antiseptic scent surrounded me. The walls were the sterile white of the asylum. The distant moans were now echoes of my own tortured mind. I was no longer the orchestrator of suffering, but a captive within the asylum's cold embrace. The very walls that echoed with my clinical indifference now confined me to the madness I had cultivated. The descent into insanity had been my own creation, a gradual unraveling masked by a facade of clinical expertise. In the asylum I once ruled, I became a patient, a victim of the darkness I had sown. The walls of this asylum are closing in on me, white and unforgiving. The sterile smell lingers in the air like a haunting ghost of my past. I'm not the doctor anymore. I'm just a nameless patient, another soul lost in the asylum's cold embrace. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting a sickly glow on the padded walls that encase me. I've become a captive in the very institution I once ruled with clinical indifference. The routine is relentless, a parade of nurses, each step echoing in the sterile corridors. Their faces are void of empathy, just like mine used to be. Dr. Anderson, the new doctor, walks in with an air of authority that sent a tremor of unease through me. His eyes, like ice, lock onto mine with clinical detachment. A clipboard clutched in his hand. He studies me as if I'm a specimen under a microscope. The room is suffocating, and I feel the weight of his gaze like a vice around my throat. My attempts to speak are met with silence, as if my voice has been stolen by the asylum's unforgiving walls. The vulnerability I see in his eyes mirrors the power I once wielded. He instructs an orderly to restrain me, and the cold metal of the handcuffs bites into my wrists. Panic sets in as I realize I am no longer in control. The tables have turned, and I'm at the mercy of a man who mirrors my own past. The first injection pierces my skin, a cocktail of medications that clouds my senses. The room spins and the walls seem to close in. The line between reality and delusion blurs, and I am plunged into a disorienting abyss. The isolation ward becomes my new reality. The padded walls, once a canvas for my experiments, now bear witness to my own descent into madness. Dr. Anderson, with an unsettling sense of satisfaction, prescribes a series of treatments reminiscent of my own sadistic practices. Electroconvulsive therapy sessions like jolts of lightning course through my fragile mind. The agonizing screams I once reveled in are now my own. The padded room amplifies the echoes of torment, and I am trapped in a nightmare of my own making. As the days melt into an indistinguishable blur, I am haunted by shadows, phantoms of the patients I tormented. Their vacant eyes and muted moans taunt me, accusing me of the sins that now consume my sanity. The asylum's sterile scent becomes a malevolent force, a reminder of the darkness I cultivated. Dr. Anderson's clinical detachment intensifies, a reflection of the monster I once was. The medications he administers strip away my grasp on reality, leaving me adrift in a sea of hallucinations. I plead for mercy, but my voice is lost in the asylum's echoing silence. The flickering lights become a cruel dance, casting grotesque shadows that morph into twisted versions of my past. Faces contorted in anguish, the wails of the tormented, and the laughter of my own madness echo through the padded walls. The line between victim and perpetrator blurs, and I am entangled in the web of my own insanity. In the isolation ward's suffocating embrace, I realize the asylum is not just a physical space, it's a manifestation of the darkness within. Dr. Anderson, now the puppet master, orchestrates my suffering with a clinical precision that mirrors my own. The torment I inflicted on others has become a relentless cycle, a karmic retribution that devours my sanity. The descent into madness is relentless, a slow unraveling that leaves me gasping for air. The padded room, once a symbol of my authority, is now a prison for a mind fractured by guilt and remorse. The asylum, with its white walls and flickering lights, is a purgatory where I am condemned to relive the horrors I once inflicted on others. As the darkness consumes me, I realize the true horror of my actions. The asylum is not just a physical space, it's a reflection of the monsters that lurk within us all. Dr. Anderson, with his clinical detachment, is the embodiment of my own sins. The cycle of suffering repeats, a relentless loop that transcends time and sanity. In the cold silence that followed, I lay bound and broken, a shell of the man I once was. The new doctor, his face still haunting me, leaving me to grapple with the remnants of my shattered psyche. The flickering lights cast a harsh glow on the sterile walls, their coldness a reflection of the abyss within. I, Dr. Richards, the architect of suffering, had become the canvas on which my own darkness played out. The asylum, once a fortress of my clinical superiority, now held me captive, a stark reminder that the sins we unleash upon others can become the chains that bind us in the end.